or anything like that.
Hardly is it cheaper when you think that Kennedy used his CIA to escalate the war in Vietnam, and we lost 60,000 men for a worthless adventure. So I would say that was very, very expensive, and you would have to defend that.
But I don't have to defend it, forgive me, and your point is totally lacking in logic. You are saying something is wrong if a particular instance didn't succeed. It's like saying medicine is wrong because you didn't save this patient.
Or marriages are wrong because you married the wrong woman.
Right. But I prefer to say medicine. You might not have saved a patient, and that doesn't condemn medicine as a whole, nor even your personal practice. So that seems not to be a very logical argument, but I seem to be unable to persuade you, so let me change this. I'm not going to ask Mr. Buckley on this because I'm convinced he's on my side, being a reasonable person. But let me ask him on the next one, and also you. You're opposed to income taxes. I don't like income taxes either. You're saying taxes are excessive, and I tend to agree with you, and I'm therefore in favor of Mr. Reagan's having reduced them. But you haven't offered a real alternative to what would happen if you succeeded in abolishing the income tax. If I understand you correctly, what you're really saying is you would abolish a number of government services and thus you wouldn't need the tax. Am I correct?
That's basically correct. And you have to make also the point that the country existed rather well and in a prosperous manner up until 1914.
Yeah, but
the purpose of the income tax is not all the taxes. So as a starter, getting rid of 40% of the revenue is not all that bad. It's a lot of fun cutting taxes. But again, the important point is not concentrating on tax per se, because tax is symbolic of big government. Again, we have to decide in this country, do we want to continue with a government that is stealing from one group to give to another, to continue to endorse the welfare state, and are we going to continue to pay for the defense of Japan and Europe and be around the world protecting an American empire? Should we have a navy in the Persian Gulf? These are the things that we have to talk about rather than just the tax. The tax is the symbol of big government.
Well, Dr. Paul, we already agreed that we are both against big government. The question is details. Which specific government functions would you abolish so that we wouldn't have to pay the tax?
It's much easier to answer the question, which ones would I keep?
All right.
And I have a lot of trouble finding very much that they're doing in Washington.
Would you abolish welfare?
Yes. Welfare is it's a principle of theft. I mean, if an individual is poor and if he's needy and he wants something and he desires something and demands something, he never has the right to go to his neighbor and steal. It's an immoral principle for him to go and steal from his neighbor. But what makes it moral in the 20th century to send me, the congressman, or me, the president, to steal from his neighbor and deliver to him? It's just as immoral.
Dr. Paul, let me, again, I'm sort of sorry, make a logical point. A tax is not the same as stealing. You see, if you steal, I take money from you without not only your consent, but possibly without your knowledge, and certainly without your foreknowledge.
You just described taxes.
No, that's not correct. Suppose you earn an income. Before you earn the income, you're fully advised that part of that income is going to go to the government. It's not stolen from you. You're told that you will not keep all your income. And if you prefer not to engage in the transaction because you want either 100% or nothing, that's what you can do. So you have some choice that you wouldn't have with stealing. But let me come to the basic point. You want to abolish welfare, right? Let me ask Mr. Buckley too. Now, many parts of welfare, I would tend to agree with you. I don't think able-bodied persons should receive welfare, etc., etc. Let's, without going into too much detail. But let me put this case before you. In New York, there are quite a number of children who have to be raised by foster parents because their own parents are either unable or unwilling to raise them or mistreat them.
Undetectable. Or undetectable.
Or undetectable. Now, what would you do with these children? Let them starve?
No, I wouldn't let them starve, but all I know is that the statistics are rather clear that since government has decided it was their role to take care of these poor, starving people, that we have a lot more of them. If you subsidize poverty, you get more of that.
I couldn't agree with you
well,
more, but that
then you
wasn't my
just
point.
answered the question. You
No,
destroyed your argument.
That wasn't quite my point.
No, there's a supplementary observation here. If you have, in a democratic order, a disposition to look after foster children, one presupposes that a majority in favor of doing so. A majority are therefore in favor of auto taxation. A majority can therefore be trusted, guided by the same impulses, to give money to the local YMCA or the local churches to look after the foster children.
But let me interject.
Forgive me, Mr. Buckley. That is not, I think, a reasonable answer.
Well, it is if you assume that existing laws are sanctioned by the majority.
Not quite, because you see, if I give money to the YMCA, etc., without assurance that you will give an about equal amount of money or proportionate to your income as I do, then I will feel after a while, why should I pay when Bill Buckley doesn't pay, and I will stop doing it. Huh?
Well, how do you account for the existence of philanthropy?
Well, there is.
Which runs at a higher figure in America than anywhere else in the world.
Absolutely, we are very generous people, but certainly would not suffice, even under present circumstances where you get tax deductions for philanthropy, etc.
Well, you can't prove that.
It would not suffice for all
the notion the notion that an American will permit a foster child to starve because he finds out that the man across the street is not contributing to the same basket on Sundays is simply not provable.
It is provable, forgive me, because historically that is what did happen before we had welfare. So it's entirely provable. And it's also
where did children starve before federalized welfare?
All over. Forgive me. The way orphans, etc., were treated before we had institutional welfare, etc., they died an early death in most cases. In some cases, depending on local arrangements, there were orphan asylums, etc., and they were cared for even better than they are today. But in many cases...
Well, you're making a historical observation. You're talking about an age which also counted slavery.
Well, but forgive me, you're asking me to prove it. How can I prove it except by saying when it didn't exist?
Prove it in context of today's advertised ethical obligation.
Yeah.
All you have to do is put them on 60 Minutes once, and the kind of money is right. Look at the amount of money that was raised voluntarily for people who were starving in Ethiopia. That wasn't government money, but something on the order of $150 million was raised in 10 days.
Right.
Because people knew about the situation. Now, if focus is put on foster children, my point is the springs of welfare reproduce those that are...
Oh, you are more optimistic than I am. I'm not, because you see, you're now comparing a sudden thing as Ethiopia is what would remain a constant and permanent obligation because these orphans will be born all the time. And I do not think that you can count on people constantly saying, okay, I give that amount when my neighbor refuses to give anything. In time, people will feel, well, this is unequal, etc. If I am providing for those in need, others should provide too, and you would in effect then have a tax.
But that's preposterous. All the churches and schools that were built by private funds during the turn of the century, there wasn't, under the Mormons there was tithing, but there wasn't tithing outside the Mormon community. Some people contributed nickels and dimes to the local church, the local parochial school, and others didn't. But they were built, they existed.
What you're really saying is that we could replace the system of taxation with the system of voluntary contributions in general. I think it would be marvelous if it could be so, but I don't think it can.
But see,
because what you say about, forgive me, about orphans would be equally true simply about contributions to defense.
The form of your question implies that if you didn't endorse your welfare state and this government program of taking care of everybody, which you concede, the more you take care of them, the more you get, you imply that anything else is less compassionate. I happen to be a libertarian because of the compassionate nature of the results. I happen to believe that the most prosperous society comes from a libertarian society where people are free to produce at the maximum amount, and that you will have the least amount of poverty and you will have the greatest amount of charity. No, it's not going to be a utopia, it's not going to be perfect, but it's much better than a system that you endorse where you say the government needs to go in and take care of these people and they need to tax and destroy the system that we have. I think that is inevitable, that you challenge the morality of the transfer ethic, you challenge the Constitution, and it doesn't work. This is the whole point. So if you care about people having houses and you want to take care of the people that are houseless and the homeless on the streets, we have to reassess our values. This whole idea that government has to build houses has literally created the homeless. So therefore, we challenge that on moral principles, constitutional principles, and really in the area of compassion. If we are compassionate, I think anybody who cares about the poor have to really start thinking about the libertarian message, because that's where the greatest amount of prosperity is going to come.
I don't disagree at all with your general idea that if you feel that poverty becomes a commodity that is sold to the government that will pay a certain price for it, then more of that commodity will be produced, surely. But that doesn't really answer the question about the orphans. It may answer questions about their parents, but the orphans are there, and we have to somehow support them. It seems to me. Now, Mr. Buckley agrees it can be done on a voluntary basis.
It's not absolutely true anyway, because after all, government did something about smallpox.
Yes, and I don't quite follow.
Well, we didn't have more smallpox, we had less of it.
Because government did something about it. Mm-hmm. Are you agreeing with me?
No, I'm saying that your generality is not absolute. I feel guilty because we have to call it off. Thank you very much, Dr. Ron Paul, running for president on the Libertarian ticket. Thank you, Professor Ernest Vanden Haag of Fordham. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Firing line will not be